Hello, and welcome to The Connection. This podcast is about understanding and building the connection we have with others and with ourselves. It is my hope that through this podcast, you'll be able to have more joy and fulfillment in your life. I'm your host, Jared Hurst. So this week, it's episode 25, and the name of this podcast episode is My Big Vulnerable Podcast Episode. I chose that name because it felt like it was the most fitting for what I want to do today. I think I would be hard pressed to be more vulnerable than I'm about to be with you. As such, prepare for some emotion. I'm always been and always will be an emotional person, and I'm okay with that. But I'm confident there's going to be some of that today because I'm really sharing some sensitive stuff with you about myself that I've gone through in my life. But I'm doing that because I care about people. I love people, and I want to help people. And I truly believe that there are some things that could be taken away from what I'm about to share that you can use to help your life. Or if nothing else, make you feel like you're not alone in the world. I want to start by sharing something about myself to give you some context. I think that I am probably one of the more inquisitive people that you'll ever meet. In fact, I'm really confident about it. They have this test, it's called a DISC assessment. And on this DISC assessment, there is this value that basically tests how big you are at learning and wanting knowledge and information. And I have seen hundreds of DISC assessments, and I've only met one person who scored as high as me with that specific area. The reason I share that with you is because ever since I was a little kid, I have thirsted to understand things. I always want to understand things. I remember, I'm pretty sure I was 5, but I may have been within a few years of that. Let's say between 5 to 7 years old. I remember going to my parents and saying, "Why is the sky blue? And where did God come from?" These are the questions I had as a little kid because I always wanted to understand things. And I remember my parents sent me to my grandfather because they didn't want to touch that question. So imagine somebody that's that inquisitive, that is always trying to understand things. And about 6 years ago is when I first really became aware of negative beliefs, how important they are to our actions, thoughts, and emotions. And I started becoming incredibly introspective at that point. Anytime I had a really big emotion, I would question it and say, where does this emotion come from? Is there a negative belief that's driving this emotion, or this thought, or this action? And I've really, really dug into that in the last 2 years. So if you've got one of the most inquisitive people that you know that spends all of this time being introspective, trying to understand their thoughts, actions, and emotions, and understand their negative beliefs, when I tell you that I just recently came to understand my biggest core wound, my biggest core negative belief, the reason I tell you that is I want you to know that if you are trying to understand those things in your life, don't give up. Don't get discouraged because it takes a lot. It takes a lot of work in order to really understand yourself. Not saying that I fully understand myself, but I understand myself better today than I did. And I've needed a lot of help along the way. I've needed a lot of people. If I were to give people advice in order to fast track their ability to understand what it is that is influencing their thoughts, actions, and emotions, I would say turn to other people. I've had 3 key moments along the course that I can think of that have all involved other people helping me. About 3 years ago, I was doing this project to try and understand my big why, my purpose. And part of that big why purpose event is I was supposed to meet with somebody and talk about the key moments of my life. And during the course of that interaction with this friend, they helped me to recognize that one of the key things in my life that has influenced my life is my adoption. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. This has nothing to do with my birth parents. This has nothing to do with my adopted parents. Or my parents, as I call them. There's my mom and my dad. Those are the people that raised me. That's my mom and dad. And then I have my birth parents, the people that made me. And I had an incredible childhood with incredibly loving parents that did everything they could to raise me the right way. But our minds as children, it doesn't matter how good your environment is. Your perception is your perception. And I think it's incredibly difficult to have a child that is adopted and not have it influence them in certain ways. So 3 years ago, I realized that adoption had an influence on my life. And then about a year ago, I had somebody tell me that they felt I had major issues with abandonment. And I recognized that. I kind of knew about the adoption thing before that moment. I kind of knew about the abandonment before that moment. But I had people reiterate things that kind of drove them home for me. And then recently, I had something in therapy that really made a difference. I haven't gone to therapy out of the times when I've been struggling with separation and divorce with my partners. Those are the only times in my life that I've really delved into therapy. So this is the first time that I've done it just for me. And I was talking with this person, and I feel I'm incredibly self-aware. I say that because I've had numerous people tell me that I'm one of the most self-aware people they know. And I trust those people, so I'm like, okay, I must be self-aware. And so I told them that I felt like I had issues around my adoption, and that as I had explored those feelings in my mind, that I felt that it was interesting that when it comes to abandonment, when it comes to rejection, when it comes to believing that I'm too much or that there's something about me that's undesirable, all of those negative beliefs all are related to what I believed was adoption and being bullied as a child. And I said to this person that was helping me with my therapy, I said to them, it's interesting when I look at it, I realize that all of my issues around my negative beliefs, around rejection, around not feeling like I'm enough, etc., all are really triggered by females. And I told her, I said, I realized that when I thought about my adoption, when I thought about my birth mother, I always pictured a woman holding a baby and just always had these questions around that situation. And so I think that because I never pictured a biological father when I was thinking about being adopted, that there's a wound there around females. Like, that is what causes me to be triggered by interactions with women and not with men. And she asked me, she said, what was the question that you always had growing up? And nobody had ever asked me that before in that way. And I said to her, I said, the general overlying question was, why didn't you want me? Because I'm such an inquisitive person, I always wanted to understand, like, what was the situation? What was the reason? And it wasn't because there's anything wrong with my parents. My parents are incredible. I just wanted to understand. I've always wanted to understand that. And I met my birth mother at one point and got my answer, but it didn't change anything. My therapist said to me, she said, just because logically in your 30s you find out why, doesn't change everything that happened before that. Because you had 30-something years of developing belief systems around that question. And I realized that was it. I believe that questions are incredibly powerful. And if you look at a question, if you have a question in your mind will find ways to answer that question. And if you have this underlying question throughout your entire childhood of why didn't you want me? Then it makes a lot of sense why every negative belief I've had has been formed. You get bullied, and it's like, why didn't you want me? And then those bullies make you feel like, well, it's because there's something wrong with you. There's something about you that is undesirable. And then you get rejected through dating, which happens to everybody. But then you're like, okay, it's because I'm not attractive, or there's something about me that's undesirable. And then I can think of a different situation that happened in my life where I made the decision that I was too much. That when I let all of that I have to give out into the world, it's too much for people and it pushes people away. And so that one question ends up forming all of these belief systems. And then a week after I had that realization in therapy, I was thinking about relationships and some of the relationships that I have had that have not ended the way that I wanted and why they hurt so much. And I had this massive aha. That every time I have a romantic relationship that ends, whether on a conscious level or on a subconscious level, I ask the question, why don't you want me? And it made so much sense. Like, why everything hurts so much. You can't have a question like that going through your head your entire life and not have it influence the way you develop. And the great thing about all this is that once you become aware of this question, then you can start counteracting it. I've said from the moment I started this podcast that awareness is one of the most powerful things in order to allow us to combat our negative beliefs, our unpleasant actions that we take, like everything. Awareness allows us to take control of our lives and choose our response. And so then I had this interaction with somebody within the last week and a half where I asked them out, and they said that they wanted to be my friend. They didn't want to go out with me. And I immediately felt this emotion around it. And I'm like, you haven't even gone on a date. Why are you having this emotion? And I immediately thought, it's because I'm asking, why don't you want me? And because I always seek to understand everything, I think that's why breakups are so hard on me. Is because not only do I have this underlying question, but I also have this insatiable need to understand things. And you don't often get explanations. And when you have that question in your mind of trying to understand things and you don't get direct answers, your mind comes up with some really crazy stuff. And it's not really positive, right? If you take me and you say, all right, I'm going to have somebody break up with you, and then you're not going to get an answer as to why they broke up with you, and you're going to have this underlying subconscious question going through your head of, why don't you want me? Then your mind starts coming up with the answers. And it's like, oh, I did this in this relationship, and I wasn't this, and if I would have been this, then this would have happened. And you just start playing these what if games in your head. And you start finding all this evidence that supports all of your negative beliefs. It's like, well, this is that, and this is why I'm too much, and this is how I push them away. And every single negative belief I have is constantly getting reinforced after each situation because my mind is looking for it, and it already has belief systems that support all of those things. And that's why I wanted to share this with you, is because this is so important. I think the main things that I've recognized that I think you can take away and use in your life is, one, look at your belief systems. All of your negative beliefs that you're consciously aware of and everything that you can come up with. You can find them through evidence based on your actions, your feelings, etc. I've had other episodes where I've talked about this, but start trying to understand your emotions and your actions and your thoughts and say, what is causing me to feel this way and act this way, etc. And start looking at all of your negative beliefs and start looking for common threads. And then when you start seeing those common threads, I would say start looking to say, is there a question I've been asking myself, or is there an event or events of my life that would explain where all of these came from? And if you can, great. If you can, great. And then start addressing those. And I've been doing different actions, different thoughts, different affirmations in order to help me counteract these things. But then I'd also really recommend therapy. This has been so helpful for me. The reason I originally went to therapy is because I had some emotions and I didn't know where they were coming from. I've gotten really good at self-evaluating, talking with my inner child, talking with my inner self, and learning to understand where emotions are coming from. I have this process where I'll ask myself, and then I'll pause and I'll listen. And a lot of the times these nudges, these feelings come to me and I know what it is. And other times I go through lists of things that I think are obvious, and then all of a sudden I feel these confirmations of this is what I'm dealing with. And I can usually figure it out. But I had these emotions and I couldn't figure it out. So I said, you know what? This is a subconscious thing. And so I need to go to somebody that can help me with subconscious things. The therapist that I went to, her name is Amy Franson. She is with Aspire Counseling. I highly recommend looking her up and contacting her if you need help. The type of therapy that I went through is called ART. It's my understanding that it's similar to EMDR. And if you don't know what any of those things are, the way that I would describe it is it's allowing you to access your subconscious mind through a type of dream walking. You're in a conscious state and you go into a visioning state where you kind of go into a dreamlike mode while you're conscious, and it allows you to access your subconscious thoughts. That's how I look at it. If you talk with Amy or if you look it up online, they may have completely different explanations, but that's how I look at it. Because I truly believe that when you are feeling an emotion and can't find an answer, your subconscious mind knows the answer. It was really fascinating for me to go through this process. Really quick, what she did is she put me into this dreamlike state. I started having these dreams and I just allowed myself to have these visions. I didn't try to direct them. I didn't try to understand them. I didn't try to counteract any of the negative beliefs or thoughts that were coming through my mind. I just allowed them to happen. And even though it never happened, I had visions of things that never took place. So if you don't know all of your negative beliefs, you don't know this one key moment that created all of your negative belief systems, that's okay. I had always had this vision, like I said, of a woman holding a baby and this overarching thought of, why don't you want me? And so when I went into this vision, there was this woman holding this baby, and she was saying these really mean things. She was saying, I don't want him, get him away from me, I'm tired of him. And all these things that really hurt. And then I went into this extra vision, and I visioned these bullies, and they were telling me that I was weak and that I was weird and that nobody would want me or like me. And none of those things ever happened. But I know what's going on there is those are the belief systems that I assigned to those experiences. That's the way that my mind interpreted those things. If you remember, I talked last week, I talked about how as a child, our mind says that anything that happens to us is because of us. And so that, in essence, those visions, those things that I heard these people say, is my mind saying, this is what happened to me, and this is why they happened to me. This is what about me caused them to happen. Because I'm weak, because I'm undesirable, because I'm too much, etc. And so I went into all these different visions, all these different experiences. I'm not going to go through all of them with you. And then she brought me out of it. And then she took me back into another session, and I did it again. And this time some of the things changed. I saw this woman holding this baby, and she was crying this time. And she's like, please don't take him away. And I believe what that is my mind was remapping those experiences from these negative beliefs and these negative words into these positive beliefs and these positive words. And then I ended up experiencing a few more things. She took me out of that and then went in a third time. And the third time she said, this time you're the director. I want you to direct how things are going to happen. And so my 44-year-old self took my 12-year-old self, and I went over to these bullies in my vision, and I got down on my knees, and I pulled them close, and I held them, and I said, I'm sorry for whatever you're going through. I'm sorry for whatever you're hurting from right now. And I turned to my 12-year-old self and I said, this isn't because of you. It's not you why they're hurting you. And so he came in from behind and we just gave this bully a great big hug sandwich and just held him and we cried. And I went to my biological mother, and she was there holding the infant me, and I held her. And I said to her, I said, he's going to have an incredible life. He is going to be so loved. So loved. And you're doing the right thing. Emotional stuff, right? Anyway, and so I went into all these different experiences and just kind of rewrote the way that my mind associates to these experiences. I don't think that means that all of a sudden I'm healed of every single thing. I have done a ton of work over the last 2 years, and I am in a significantly better spot than I was. I get triggered a lot less than I used to. When I do get triggered, it's not as emotional or intense as it used to. But I needed this. I needed this moment. And I believe that whether you recognize it or not, you need a moment like this. There are things that are affecting your life. Everybody has them. I truly believe that everybody has things from their childhood, from their adulthood, that are affecting and driving their life that they need to work through. Whether it's a traumatic divorce, a loss of a loved one, being bullied, or you don't even think that anything bad has ever really happened to you. It doesn't matter. Your mind comes up with these really crazy interpretations of things, especially when you're a child. Especially when you're a child. Doesn't matter how loved you were and how amazing things were. It can put negative spins on positive experiences. And so that's what this episode is about. I hope that you won't give up on continuing to try to understand yourself. I hope that just because things are good in your life right now, that you don't sit back and say, there's nothing I need to work on. Because whether you recognize it or not, there are things that you need to work on. I hope that you will be willing to get help and turn to other people. Sometimes we need an outside perspective in order for us to see the things that we need help with, that we need to work through. And you also need to put all the work into yourself. I would argue that I've put more work into myself in the last 2 years than most people do in a lifetime. I'm pretty confident of that. It's been my number one goal and mission. I read, I study, I go inside myself, I think, I'm compassionate, I change thoughts. I mean, I can't tell you how much work I've had to do to get to where I am now, and I still have a lot of work to do. So don't be too proud to go out and work on yourself. And talk with Amy. Amy's incredible. She will definitely help your life. I have no doubt. I know that change is not easy. I know that it is not quick. I'm doing all I can to understand my process and what I'm going through and make as many shortcuts for other people as I can so that way I can help other people go through the same process I'm going through, but not have to take as long or put as much effort in as I am doing. And I know that I'm going to get there. One day, I'm going to be just a ridiculous, awesome badass. I already feel like I am a little bit, but I'm getting there. And I know some people don't like that term, but I love it. It's like my term. I'm going to be able to make a difference in people's lives. And it's because I want this bad enough. I want this for myself. I want this for that poor little 12-year-old Jared that got bullied and made fun of, because he deserves to have an incredible life. And I want this for every other person that's out there dealing with pain that they don't need to deal with. Go do the work. Be vulnerable, be open, ask for help. I know you can do it. I believe in you. Until next week, remember that you are not alone.